England, Norway, and several other European countries pass laws restricting puberty blockers. Meanwhile, California proposes a bill which would classify parents in custody battles as abusive if they refuse to use their child's preferred gender pronouns. And the U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill trying to protect gas stoves from being pushed out of existence. This is the news that you need to know for today, Wednesday, June 14th, 2023. But first, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below so that you can stay notified every time I post a Julie Noted News video or a timeless video. And also follow me at Julie R. Hartman on Instagram and Twitter. So, we hear all about these European countries being the happiest places on earth and how the United States should seek to emulate these states. Well, if that is indeed true, then shouldn't we seek to emulate them on one of the most important issues of our time? That is the question, which really shouldn't be a question or debate, of whether minors should be able to obtain gender transition surgeries and/or puberty blockers. Well, England came out and said no more in their country. The National Health Service of England announced this past Friday that they would limit the use of puberty blockers to children who were only enrolled in that institute's clinical trials. Now, of course, there is an argument to be made that they should just be banned, period. Why do you even need clinical trials for minors to give them these treatments when they are too young to perhaps make an informed, consensual decision for themselves? But at least England is scaling it back to clinical trials instead of just handing it out willy-nilly to whoever wants it and seeks to obtain these surgeries and these treatments at a hospital. Actually, England also shut down one of the biggest gender clinics this past week. It's called the Tavistock Gender Identity Development Service. And isn't it interesting? This service reported that the number of children seeking puberty blockers has skyrocketed over the past decade. 250 young people came to seek their services in 2011. Guess how many in 2021? 5,000. That is like a 2,000% increase in a decade of children who want to seek puberty blockers. The New York Times reported that the National Health Service of England is shutting down their use of puberty blockers only to clinical trials because of this supply and demand issue, that the supply of puberty blockers cannot keep up with the demand where people want them. But the agency said that in addition to the supply problem, there is also a moral and ethical issue posed by this case. They said, quote, there is not enough evidence to support their safety, their meaning the puberty blocker safety, or clinical efficacy as a routinely available treatment for young children. Yes, indeed, that is totally true. And again, it seems that we shouldn't even need to have evidence to support whether or not these things are safe. We should just be able to use our common sense to say that these body-altering drugs maybe shouldn't be used on people under the age of 18. What's interesting about this situation is that proponents of these treatments say, why are you denying people the right to express their gender identity? No, this is not what the issue is about. When you are 18 years old or 21 years old, you can do whatever you want. Some people like me may disagree with your decisions, may think that they are ill-advised and unfortunate. But nevertheless, it is your right to make decisions about your life as you see fit, as long as they do not harm other people. The question here is with regard to children. Just as minors should not be able to vote until a certain age, drive a car until a certain age, get a tattoo until a certain age, go skydiving till a certain age, have a cigarette till a certain age, and drink alcohol till a certain age, I think adding in that they shouldn't be able to get life-altering hormones at a certain age could be a plausible addition. So I mentioned in the introduction that England is one of the European countries who is instituting this change. Finland has also passed some restrictions limiting these puberty blockers to only individuals in clinical trials. Sweden has piggybacked on that, additionally only limiting it to clinical trials. The Netherlands, too, Interestingly, the Netherlands is where there were puberty blockers first tested on children with gender dysphoria back in the 1990s. There were some instances of transgenderism that were reported in the 70s and 80s, but puberty blockers for the first time were tested out in this country in the 90s. And this very country, which opened the door to this issue, is right now saying, no, this has gone too far. We're going to restrict it. Norway came out and said no puberty blockers at all. The Norwegian Healthcare Investigation Board ruled recently that guidance encouraging puberty blockers and sex change surgeries for gender dysphoric young people are not appropriate and not supported by enough evidence that these procedures are safe and made with informed, consent. I applaud Norway and England and all of these other countries that are leading the charge against this societal evil. Another interesting fact here, I mentioned that English Clinic, the Tavistock Gender Identity Development Service, the amount of people seeking this treatment has skyrocketed. It is the same in Norway. 500 referrals were made to one of the biggest clinics in Norway from 2018 to 2021. Norway is a very small country, just in case you didn't know. 10 years earlier, though, from 2007 to 2010, the number of people who were seeking these surgeries ranged from 50 to 70. So it went from 50 to 70 to 10 times that. 10 years later, 500 between 2018 and 2021. Guess how many people sought these treatments from 1975 to 1990 at this one clinic in Norway? 4. You can tell this has taken off recently, and a lot of it is because of social contagion. Now, 20 red states here in the United States have passed laws either banning or heavily restricting the use of puberty blockers and gender transition surgeries for minors. In some states, it is actually a felony to provide these treatments to these individuals under the age of 18. But what is going on? Our own Department of Justice, which is in charge of justice for the entire nation, is targeting these states, suing them, in fact, as the DOJ is doing with the state of Tennessee, saying that these bans on puberty blockers for minors are unconstitutional and are violating citizens' rights to health care. And the DOJ has said that it is unfair and discriminatory for states like Tennessee to deny surgeries to transgender youths that they would give to non-transgender youths. That is such a farce. That is such an obscene line of argument. There are young people who have to get their legs or their arms or other parts of their bodies amputated. Maybe they've been in a horrible accident. Maybe they have melanoma or some other type of cancer which requires this procedure. So yes, those non-transgender youths are getting the same treatment that is being denied to transgender youths, but the context is totally different. It shows you what happens to a society that is severed from a strong value system. This moral relativism creeps in, and people no longer understand the once agreed upon distinctions, moral, ethical distinctions that made our society run properly. I like to say, in the United States, as in any pluralistic society, it is necessary and indeed helpful to have two sides that disagree with one another. But if we're using the image of a Venn diagram, there can be two circles, but there needs to be one big one in the center that encompasses the majority. In other words, we as a society, in order to make things work, in order to afford the greatest amount of freedoms and privileges to each and every one of us, we need that center of the Venn diagram to be large, a shared set of values. And if we are disagreeing on this, the fact that this is even a question, giving these basically amputations to minors, stalling their growth, even if you just think about it from a non-gender affirming perspective, it is a really bad thing for your health, regardless of your gender, to stall puberty, to stall a natural process that helps your body, whether it's male or female, grow. The fact that this is even a debate shows you the dismal ethical state, sadly, of America right now. Perfect, Gloomy but perfect segue into the next story. A new California law has been proposed this week, which would offer to make it easier to take kids away from parents who do not affirm their children's gender identities. This bill is called the TGI, Transgender, Gender Diverse, and Intersex. What does it even mean? TGI Youth Empowerment Act. It's also known as Assembly Bill 957 here in California, and it was created by Assemblywoman Lori D. Wilson. She is the mother of a trans child, and she is serving as a Democrat for the state of California. Now, this statute, if it passes, it goes to the California State Senate for a vote, would allow courts to consider a parent's affirmation of their child's gender identity as a possible criteria or not criteria met for that parent to assume custody of the child. It allows courts to classify parents who are in custody battles as abusive if those parents do not follow the prescribed or wished pronouns that the child wants. This is sick. So you're telling me if you have a 10 or 11-year-old who is going through a phase, who sees on TikTok that he or she may be non-binary and goes to school and comes home and starts referring to him or herself as the opposite gender, you're telling me if that happens and a parent doesn't want to affirm that change, they can be taken away from their kid? They can have their visitation and their custody rights revoked or lessened if they don't do that? This is what would happen according to this California bill. Let's listen to what the Assemblywoman who proposed the bill, again, this is Lori D. Wilson, said in the California State Assembly about this statute.
So this particular bill adds the very important factor that affirming a child's gender identity is in their best interest, which is what your question is about. Why does it actually say that in an affirmative way? And it really is because if you have a 7-year-old who's talking about having a potential to say, being able to articulate that they believe that they are not the same gender as they are biologically, then it should be affirmed. And through care, it should be determined. And that's what we did with our own child. And that would give the ability for a parent who wasn't sure to affirm and get their child the care that they need to make that, so they can begin to articulate that determination. But by saying and rejecting it in wholesale, then you're essentially rejecting your child. And that is not in the best interests of a child. We should be affirming our children in every possible way and getting them whatever appropriate care they need, whether it's based on their gender, whether it's based on how their studies are in school. It doesn't matter. Our children should be affirmed. And this is saying that you have to include gender affirmation as a part of it.
I know I sound like a staunch conservative when I say this, but the encroachment of the state into these matters is really, really disconcerting. Of course, transgender individuals, gay individuals, bisexual individuals, however you identify, you deserve to be respected. But again, why in this particular context must the state be involved? Why do they care so much if a parent is not following the prescribed pronouns of a child? The child is not yet old enough to make these decisions. Also, we go down a really, really dark path here if we are going to start policing the words and the parenting decisions of family members. In matters pertaining to custody and visitation, there is one thing that matters: whether the parent is truly abusive or incompetent to care for the child. That involves physical abuse, verbal abuse. Not affirming a pronoun does not count as verbal abuse. And negligence, those are the things that should be considered in the custody battle. Not something like this. It is so, so sick. And this weird agenda behind it, this incessant desire to proselytize this transgenderism. Of course, there are some individuals who truly suffer from gender dysphoria and do believe that they are transgender. But there are so many for which this is a social contagion. The numbers show it. If this were a thing that had existed for as long as human history, we would have seen more transgenders throughout human history, just as we have seen gay people for all of human history. This has really only come up in the past 50 years. And now we are making it like it's been a legitimized, mainstream, common thing for everyday individuals. And I'm telling you, we are going down a dark path. This is also not a fringe movement. People who say, oh, you know, conservatives way overhype the threat of this. No, this is a California state law that could be passed. It probably will get passed because the state Senate is overwhelmingly Democratic. In Washington state, there was a law passed recently, signed into office by the governor, that minors who seek gender-affirming care without parental consent can go to shelters, housing, foster care, and the shelters, housing, and foster care do not have to notify the parents of the child that that child left them. A really, really scary time. This shouldn't be a right or left issue. This is just a moral decency issue. Now, finally, speaking of laws being passed, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill this week regulating banning on gas stoves. The House passed the Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act to prevent federal regulation from putting a ban around these devices. It probably won't be passed into law because laws originate in the House, then they're kicked over to the Senate for approval, and then they have to be signed by the president. The House is overwhelmingly Republican, not overwhelmingly, majority Republican. The Senate is overwhelmingly Democrat, and I would say that the president is overwhelmingly Democrat too. So probably the Senate's not even going to sign it, and if it gets kicked up to President Biden, the White House has said that he's going to veto it. So probably not going to happen, but still, it's a good step forward. It gets on the record that this is an important issue, and if people decide how to vote, they will know that it will be a priority. So how did this gas stove debate get heated up? No pun intended. I don't even know if that's a pun. No joke intended, but hey, it worked. Well, back in January of this year, one of the commissioners of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission, my gosh, that sounds like a chaotic thing, said in a Bloomberg interview that they may be considering banning gas stoves for people in the United States. 40% of Americans, just under actually 40% of Americans, use gas stoves. So once this came out in January, people started going, wait a minute, there's going to be this ban initiated by the highest levels of our government? No. People started protesting. Republican legislators started to get a coalition together to perhaps pass laws like this one to prevent it from happening. And then in February, the Energy Department proposed new energy conservation standards that they would enact for people who have gas stoves starting in 2027. And they included, among other things, some pretty harsh restrictions on how many minutes a day you could use your gas stove. From there, in May, New York State became the first state in the union to ban gas stoves in new homes and apartments that were being built. Now, we know that at the end of 2022, both California and New York passed laws that said that starting in 2035, people would not be able to make gas-powered or buy gas-powered vehicles anymore. So there is this great movement, which indeed has been, in some cases, passed into law in order to restrict gas-powered devices. The U.S. House of Representatives, led by the GOP, is trying to get ahead of this. So the bill would ban the commission from banning gas stoves and would also prevent the commission and the U.S. Energy Department from, quote, substantially making these gas stoves more expensive by slapping on all of these regulations and taxes. There's another bill that hasn't been voted on in the U.S. House of Representatives. It's called the Save Our Gas Stoves Act, and it would stop the Energy Department from slapping on these restrictions. So the first bill that was passed that I mentioned to you prevents these departments from banning gas stoves. This second subsequent bill would ban departments from slapping on restrictions on gas stoves. So look, there is this argument that we should be transitioning towards a greener future and maybe get away from gas-powered vehicles, gas-powered stoves. Sure, we should always be trying to move to make more improvements, especially environmental improvements. The problem is that this is, again, government encroaching into the lives of Americans, setting unrealistic standards, especially when it comes to cars. Our electric grid right now it is not even close to being capable of supporting electric-powered vehicles. And also, There is this staggering hypocrisy because if you really do want to help the environment, you know the thing that you could ban that would be pretty easy to ban, that wouldn't inconvenience a lot of Americans or even 1% of Americans. It'd probably inconvenience 0.001%, but who cares about them? Private planes. Why don't they totally get rid of private planes? Why is the Energy Department and this U.S. Commission, Consumer Product Safety Commission, focusing on everyday appliances, everyday things that working class Americans, and even not working class Americans, but everyone uses? Why are they focusing on those things instead of getting rid of one of the biggest pollutants in the world, these private jets, okay? The average carbon footprint for the average American is 16 tons of carbon dioxide per year. A private plane emits 2 tons of carbon dioxide in 1 hour. So if you are on an 8-hour flight, or if you fly for 4 hours somewhere and then you fly home for 4 hours, that singular private plane ride, you will have emitted the same amount of carbon that the average American just emits in 1 year. But our energy department's focusing on the everyday appliances that Americans use. Get rid of the private planes. It will make a significant difference. That's the way I'm going to end today. You heard it here. Be sure to follow me at Julie R. Hartman on Instagram and Twitter. Hit the subscribe button down below, and I will see you all soon. Take care.